I never thought I would see the day when someone would stand on my family ranch, point at the house my grandfather built with his own hands, and tell me it belonged to them. But there she was, perfectly manicured nails gripping fake legal documents, designer heels planted firmly in the dirt that had been in my family for 3 generations. "This is all mine now," she said with the kind of cold confidence that comes from a lifetime of getting everything she wants. "You need to pack up and leave." The morning sun cast long shadows across the pasture where my cattle grazed peacefully, unaware that a woman in $1,000 outfit was trying to steal their home. Her expensive SUV sat parked next to the fence line, and I could see surveying equipment scattered around a fresh hole she had dug in my property. That was the moment I realized that some people will do anything to get what they want, even steal an entire ranch. The alarm clock read 5:30 in the morning when I rolled out of bed, same as I had done every day for the past 15 years. Ranch life does not wait for anyone, and there were fence repairs that needed my attention on the eastern boundary of my property. I grabbed my coffee, loaded my tools into the pickup truck, and headed out into what I expected to be another quiet morning on my family land. The drive to the eastern pasture took me down a dirt road that had been carved out by my grandfather decades ago. Every bump and curve was familiar, every landmark held a memory. This was more than just property to me. It was home, legacy, and sanctuary all rolled into one. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers that grew along the fence line. But something was wrong. About halfway to my destination, I noticed tire tracks cutting through the grass where no vehicle should have been. Fresh tracks, deep enough to suggest a heavy SUV or truck had passed through recently. My heart started beating faster as I followed the trail with my eyes. It led directly toward the section of fence I was planning to repair. I parked my truck and stepped out, grabbing my camera from the glove compartment. Years of dealing with occasional trespassers had taught me to document everything. As I walked toward the fence line, the scene that unfolded before me stopped me cold in my tracks. There was a woman, probably in her 50s, dressed like she was heading to a country club luncheon rather than standing in the middle of a cattle pasture. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. She wore designer jeans that probably cost more than most people made in a week, and her shoes were completely inappropriate for ranch terrain. But it was not her appearance that shocked me. It was what she was doing. She had professional surveying equipment set up next to my fence, and she was actively digging holes in my property with what looked like expensive tools. Her pristine white SUV sat parked nearby, its license plate from the county seat 40 miles away. I approached slowly, clearing my throat to announce my presence. She looked up at me with the kind of casual indifference you might show to a stray dog, then went back to her work as if I did not exist. The audacity was breathtaking. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice polite but firm. "This is private property. Can I ask what you are doing here?" She straightened up and fixed me with a stare that could have frozen water in July. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who was used to getting her way without question. "I have every right to be here," she said, brushing dirt off her manicured hands. "This is important work, and I do not have time to explain myself to you." The dismissive tone sent a chill down my spine. I had dealt with plenty of difficult people over the years, but there was something different about this woman. Something dangerous in the way she looked at me, as if I was the one who did not belong on land that had been in my family for generations. I pulled out my phone and started recording, knowing instinctively that I was going to need evidence of whatever was happening here. The woman watched me pull out my phone with the kind of cold amusement that made my skin crawl. Instead of being concerned about being caught trespassing, she seemed almost entertained by my reaction. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a manila folder stuffed with official-looking documents. "I suppose introductions are in order," she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "I am Karen Mitchell, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, and you, sir, are trespassing on HOA property." The words hit me like a physical blow. Willowbrook Estates was a luxury development about 5 miles from my ranch, the kind of place where houses started at $500,000 and the residents drove cars that cost more than most people made in a year. But it was nowhere near my property line, and it certainly had no claim to my family ranch. "This is my land," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "My family has owned this ranch for 3 generations. I have the deed to prove it." Karen laughed, a sound like breaking glass in the morning air. She opened her folder and pulled out what appeared to be survey maps and legal documents. The papers looked official, with county seals and legal stamps that gave them an air of authority I found deeply unsettling. "Your so-called deed is either fake or severely outdated," she said, spreading the documents on the hood of her SUV. "These are the real property lines, filed with the county and approved by the appropriate authorities. As you can see, this entire section belongs to the Willowbrook Estates HOA." I stared at the maps in disbelief. According to her documents, my ranch property was somehow included in the boundaries of her HOA development. The lines were drawn in red ink, encompassing not just the pasture where we stood, but my entire homestead, including the house my grandfather had built. "This is insane," I said, pulling out my own property deed from my wallet. It was worn from years of being carried, but it was legitimate and legal. "Look at this. This deed has been in my family since 1952. Your development was not even built until 10 years ago." Karen barely glanced at my deed before dismissing it with a wave of her hand. "Documents can be forged," she said with casual cruelty. "Old papers mean nothing when proper legal procedures have not been followed. I suggest you contact a lawyer because you are going to need one." The surreal nature of the conversation was making my head spin. Here was a woman, standing on my property with surveying equipment, claiming that my family ranch belonged to her HOA based on documents that made no legal sense. But she delivered every word with such absolute confidence that for a moment I wondered if I was losing my mind. "You need to leave," I said, my voice getting stronger as anger began to override confusion. "Right now, this is private property and you are trespassing." Karen smiled again, that same cold expression that sent shivers down my spine. She pulled out her cell phone and held it up like a weapon. "Actually, you are the one who needs to leave," she said. "I am calling the police to have you removed from HOA property. You are harassing me and interfering with official business." The audacity was so complete, so breathtaking in its scope, that I actually laughed out loud. But my laughter died quickly as I realized she was serious. Deadly serious. She genuinely believed that she had the right to be on my property, and she was prepared to use the full weight of the legal system to back up her claims. As she dialed what I assumed was 911, I continued recording everything on my phone. The morning sun was getting higher, casting harsh shadows across the pasture, and I found myself thinking that this peaceful piece of land had never seen anything like the confrontation that was unfolding on it. Karen continued her surveying work while talking on the phone, as if having me arrested was just another item on her daily to-do list. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told no, never been challenged, never been denied anything she wanted. But she had never tried to steal a ranch from someone who was prepared to fight for it. The police never came that morning, which should have been my first clue that Karen's threats were mostly bluster. But I was not taking any chances. The moment she drove away in her pristine SUV, I was on the phone with my attorney, Tom Rodriguez, who had handled my family's legal affairs for over a decade. "Tom, I need you to pull every piece of documentation we have on my ranch property," I said, packing around my kitchen like a caged animal. "Someone is claiming that my land belongs to an HOA, and they have official-looking papers to back it up." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Tom had seen a lot of strange legal situations over the years, but I could tell this one had caught him off guard. "Send me everything you recorded," he said finally, "and do not let anyone else on your property without calling me first. Something about this sounds very wrong." I spent the rest of that day turning my dining room into a war room. Property deeds, survey maps, tax records, and legal documents covered every surface. I called the county records office and requested copies of every filing related to my property in the past 5 years. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Karen Mitchell had been busy, very busy. Over the past 2 years, she had filed no fewer than 6 different boundary disputes and property claims involving ranches and farms adjacent to her Willowbrook Estates development. Each filing was accompanied by official-looking surveys and legal documents that somehow expanded the boundaries of her HOA to include privately owned land. Most disturbing of all, 3 of those claims had been successful. 3 families had lost portions of their property to Karen's fraudulent filings, either because they could not afford to fight her in court or because they had been intimidated into settling out of court. Tom called me back that evening with news that made my stomach turn. "She has connections in the county planning office," he said. "Someone has been rubber-stamping her filings without proper review. This is not just trespassing or harassment. This is organized fraud on a massive scale." I immediately installed security cameras around my property, focusing on the areas where Karen had been digging. If she came back, and I was certain she would, I wanted every moment documented. The peaceful ranch that had been my sanctuary now felt like a fortress under siege. Karen did come back, 3 times in the next week, each time with different people. First, it was a man in a cheap suit who claimed to be a process server. Then it was a team of surveyors who insisted they had the right to access HOA property for boundary verification. Finally, it was Karen herself with 2 contractors who began marking trees and fence posts with spray paint. Each time I documented everything: photos, videos, license plates, faces. I was building a case, piece by piece, evidence by evidence. Tom had put me in touch with a private investigator named Sarah Chen, who specialized in property fraud cases. What she uncovered about Karen's operation was like something out of a crime novel. She targets rural properties owned by elderly farmers or single landowners, Sarah explained during our meeting. People who might not have the resources or knowledge to fight back effectively. She uses fake surveys and forged documents to create the appearance of legitimate claims, then relies on the legal system's slow pace to establish physical possession of the disputed land. The most chilling part of Sarah's report was the list of other victims. 12 families in our county alone had faced similar harassment from Karen Mitchell. Most had settled out of court, losing portions of their family land rather than face the expense and uncertainty of a legal battle. But Karen had made one crucial mistake. She had chosen to target someone who was not going to back down, someone with the resources and determination to fight back. The hunter was about to become the hunted, though she did not know it yet. As I sat in my dining room that night, surrounded by evidence of Karen's criminal enterprise, I made a decision that would change everything. I was not just going to defend my property. I was going to make sure that Karen Mitchell never stole another acre from another family ever again. I should have known that Karen would not go quietly into the night. 2 weeks after my investigation began, I was served with papers that made my worst nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. A sheriff's deputy stood on my front porch with a temporary restraining order that accused me of harassment, intimidation, and interfering with lawful HOA activities. According to the court documents, I had threatened Karen Mitchell multiple times, prevented her from accessing property that rightfully belonged to her homeowners association, and engaged in a campaign of surveillance and stalking that made her fear for her safety. The lies were so elaborate and detailed that I wondered if Karen had spent more time crafting her false testimony than she had spent trying to steal my ranch. This restrains you from approaching within 500 feet of Ms. Mitchell or any HOA representatives conducting business on the disputed property, the deputy explained, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. That includes the eastern section of your ranch where the boundary dispute is ongoing. The irony was crushing. I was being banned from portions of my own property while the legal system sorted through Karen's web of lies. But the worst part was yet to come. Within hours of being served with the restraining order, I heard the rumble of heavy machinery coming from the direction of my eastern pasture. I grabbed my binoculars and climbed onto my roof, where I could see over the rolling hills to the disputed area. What I saw there filled me with a rage so pure and focused that my hands shook as I held the binoculars steady. Karen had brought in contractors with earth-moving equipment, and they were actively building a fence across my property. The sound of diesel engines and the sight of fence posts being driven into land that had been in my family for generations created a visceral reaction that threatened to overwhelm my judgment. I wanted to march over there with my shotgun and order them off my property. But I knew that was exactly what Karen wanted. She was trying to provoke me into doing something that would validate her false claims and give her ammunition for additional legal attacks. Instead, I called Tom Rodriguez and Sarah Chen. Within an hour, both of them were at my ranch with professional photographers and surveying equipment of our own. If Karen wanted to play the documentation game, we would play it better than she ever could. She is trying to establish adverse possession, Tom explained as we watched the contractors work from a distance. By physically occupying the disputed land and maintaining exclusive control over it, she hopes to strengthen her fraudulent claim. It is a common tactic in property fraud cases. Sarah had been busy with her own investigation, and what she discovered about Karen's network of corruption went deeper than any of us had imagined. She has a contact in the county planning office who pre-approves her fraudulent surveys, Sarah said, showing me photographs and documents. A man named Robert Hayes who has been taking payments to rubber stamp her applications without proper review. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Karen had not just been filing false claims randomly. She had been working with corrupt officials to create a systematic process for stealing property from rural landowners. The fake surveys, the forged documents, the intimidation tactics. It was all part of a carefully orchestrated criminal enterprise designed to transfer privately owned land to her HOA development. But Karen had made a critical error in judgment. The story of the HOA Karen trying to steal a ranch had caught the attention of the local media. A reporter named Jessica Martinez from the county newspaper called me that afternoon, asking for an interview about the property dispute that had the whole community talking. "People are furious," Jessica told me during our phone conversation. "Social media is exploding with stories about HOA overreach, and your situation has become a symbol of everything people hate about unchecked authority. Can I come out and document what is happening on your ranch?" I agreed immediately. If Karen wanted to weaponize the legal system and the court of public opinion, I was prepared to fight her on both fronts. The cameras that arrived at my ranch that evening were not just from the local newspaper. Word had spread to regional television stations and online news outlets. The story of the woman trying to steal a ranch with fake documents had captured the public imagination in a way that none of us had anticipated. As I watched the news crews set up their equipment, I realized that Karen's greatest strength, her absolute confidence in her own authority, was about to become her greatest weakness. She had overplayed her hand, and the entire community was about to witness her downfall. The morning that everything changed started with a phone call from Tom Rodriguez that made my coffee taste like liquid victory. His voice was electric with excitement as he delivered news that I had been praying to hear for weeks. "We have her," he said without preamble. "The private investigator found the smoking gun, and the county district attorney is ready to file criminal charges. Karen Mitchell is going down, and she is taking her corrupt friends with her." Sarah Chen had outdone herself. Working with a team of forensic accountants and document experts, she had traced the paper trail of Karen's criminal enterprise back to its roots. The evidence was overwhelming and damning in ways that exceeded even my wildest hopes for justice. The fake surveys and forged documents were just the beginning. Sarah had discovered financial records showing payments from Karen to Robert Hayes, the county planning official who had been rubber-stamping her fraudulent filings. But the real bombshell was the discovery of Karen's true motive for stealing my ranch. "She needs your land to complete a development deal worth $47 million, Sarah explained during our emergency meeting. Her Willowbrook Estates project was supposed to include a golf course and country club, but she never secured the necessary acreage. Your ranch is the missing piece that makes the whole development profitable." The private investigator had also uncovered something that made my blood boil with righteous fury. Karen had been specifically targeting elderly and isolated landowners because she believed they would be easier to intimidate and less likely to fight back effectively. She had stolen over 300 acres from 7 different families, using the same pattern of fake documents, legal intimidation, and corrupt officials. But the most satisfying discovery came from my own security cameras. The high-definition footage had captured Karen in several unguarded moments when she thought no one was watching. In one particularly damning video, she was caught explaining her entire scheme to the contractors working on the illegal fence. "Once we get the old man off this property, we can flip it to the development company for millions," Karen said on camera, her voice clear and unmistakable. "These rural idiots never fight back properly. They do not have the money or the connections to challenge us in court." The arrogance was breathtaking, but it was also legally devastating. Sarah had handed the district attorney a case so solid that conviction was virtually guaranteed. The video evidence alone was enough to prove conspiracy, fraud, and criminal trespass beyond any reasonable doubt. The dominoes began falling with stunning speed. Other victims of Karen's scheme came forward, no longer afraid to speak out now that they knew they were not alone. A rancher named Bill Thompson told me about losing 20 acres of prime grazing land to Karen's fake surveys. A widow named Mary Chen described how Karen had stolen the land where her late husband's workshop had stood, using forged documents and intimidation tactics identical to what I had experienced. She told me that my deed was fake and that I was trespassing on HOA property, Mary said through tears during our phone conversation. I was so scared and confused that I just signed her settlement agreement. I gave her my land because I thought I had no choice. The stories kept coming, each one more heartbreaking than the last. Karen had been operating like a feudal lord, taking whatever land she wanted from families who trusted the legal system to protect them. But her reign of terror was about to end in spectacular fashion. The county officials who had enabled Karen's scheme began distancing themselves from her as quickly as possible. Robert Hayes was fired from his position and faced his own criminal charges for accepting bribes and falsifying official documents. The county planning office launched an internal investigation that revealed years of fraudulent filings that had somehow been approved without proper review. Even Karen's own HOA board turned against her when the scope of her criminal activities became public knowledge. The board members, horrified to learn that their association president was a criminal who had been using their organization as a front for property theft, voted unanimously to remove her from all positions and ban her from community activities. The local media coverage intensified as more details emerged about Karen's criminal enterprise. The story had everything that captured public attention: corruption, greed, ordinary families fighting against powerful interests, and the promise of justice for the underdog. My ranch became the symbol of resistance against unchecked authority and HOA overreach. But the best news came when Tom called to tell me that the restraining order had been dissolved and that Karen was facing multiple felony charges including fraud, forgery, criminal conspiracy, and theft by deception. The woman who had tried to steal my ranch with fake paperwork was about to learn that actions have consequences, and her consequences were just beginning. Karen's final appearance on my ranch was like watching a Greek tragedy unfold in real time. She arrived on a Tuesday morning in the same white SUV, but everything else about her had changed. Her once perfect appearance showed cracks that no amount of expensive makeup could hide. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her hair disheveled, and her eyes held the wild desperation of someone watching their entire world collapse. I was ready for her. Tom Rodriguez and Sarah Chen were both present, along with a film crew from the local news station that had been documenting the story. Multiple cameras were rolling as Karen parked her SUV and stumbled out, clutching a briefcase full of what I assumed were more fake documents. "We need to talk," she called out as she approached, her voice carrying a manic edge that made everyone present take a step back. "I can make this all go away. I can make you rich beyond your wildest dreams." I walked out to meet her, holding copies of all the evidence that Tom and Sarah had compiled. Bank records, video footage, witness statements, and official criminal charges, everything that proved her guilt beyond any shadow of doubt. "It is over, Karen," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional despite the rage burning in my chest. "The district attorney has filed criminal charges. The FBI is investigating your financial crimes. Your own HOA board has banned you from the community. There is nothing left to negotiate." The transformation was instant and terrifying. Karen's desperate composure shattered like glass, revealing the narcissistic monster that had been hiding beneath her polished exterior. Her face contorted with rage as she screamed at me, her voice echoing across the pasture. "You do not understand who you are dealing with," she shrieked, spittle flying from her mouth. "I have connections, I have power. I can destroy you and everyone you care about." But even as she made her threats, I could see the fear in her eyes. The private investigator's report had revealed the full scope of her financial problems. The development deal that had motivated her land theft was falling apart, her legal bills were mounting, and her criminal defense was going to cost more money than she could afford. "None of this is real," Karen continued, her voice rising to a pitch that made the news cameras zoom in closer. "These documents are all fake. This land belongs to my HOA. You are all conspirators in a massive fraud." The delusion was complete and absolute. Even faced with overwhelming evidence of her own crimes, Karen was incapable of accepting responsibility for her actions. In her twisted worldview, she was the victim of some elaborate conspiracy rather than the perpetrator of systematic property theft. That was when she pulled out her cell phone and dialed 911. "I need police assistance immediately," she said into the phone, her voice taking on a theatrical quality that would have been comical if it were not so disturbing. "I am being threatened and harassed on my own property. These people are trespassing on HOA land, and they are trying to intimidate me into leaving." The 911 operator's questions seemed to confuse Karen, who became increasingly agitated as she tried to explain why she was calling for help while standing on property that clearly did not belong to her. But she persisted with her story, insisting that my family ranch was actually part of her homeowners association, and that I was the criminal in this situation. The police arrived within 15 minutes, and their response was everything I could have hoped for. The officers who stepped out of their patrol cars were already familiar with Karen's case, having been briefed by the district attorney's office about her criminal activities. They approached the situation with professional skepticism, clearly prepared for exactly the kind of delusional performance that Karen was delivering. "Ma'am, can you show me documentation proving your ownership of this property?" the senior officer asked, his tone suggesting that he already knew the answer. Karen opened her briefcase and began pulling out the same fake surveys and forged documents that she had shown me weeks earlier. But this time, she was showing them to police officers who had been trained to recognize fraudulent paperwork and who were already aware of her criminal history. "These documents have been determined to be fraudulent as part of an ongoing criminal investigation," the officer said after examining Karen's papers. "You are currently facing multiple felony charges related to property fraud and document forgery." The arrest was swift and professional. Karen was handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol car, while she continued screaming about conspiracies and corruption, her voice becoming increasingly incoherent as the reality of her situation finally began to penetrate her delusions. The news cameras captured every moment of her breakdown, creating viral video content that would be shared millions of times across social media platforms. The ultimate Karen meltdown, complete with false 911 calls and delusional claims about property ownership, became a cautionary tale about entitlement, corruption, and the inevitable consequences of criminal behavior. Justice arrived with the satisfying weight of inevitability. 6 months after Karen's arrest on my ranch, the courtroom was packed with victims, reporters, and members of the community who had followed the case from its bizarre beginning to its satisfying conclusion. I sat in the front row, flanked by Tom Rodriguez and the other families that Karen had victimized over the years. The criminal trial was swift and decisive. The evidence against Karen was so overwhelming that her defense attorney advised her to accept a plea bargain rather than face the possibility of decades in prison. She was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and racketeering. The corrupt county official who had enabled her crimes received 5 years for his role in the conspiracy. But the criminal penalties were just the beginning of Karen's downfall. The civil lawsuits filed by her victims resulted in judgments totaling over $12 million in damages and restitution. Karen's assets were seized to pay these judgments, including her luxury home in the Willowbrook Estates development that she had once ruled like a personal kingdom. The irony was poetic in its perfection. The woman who had tried to steal my ranch ended up losing everything she owned, including the crown jewel of her precious HOA community. Her house was sold at auction to pay restitution to the families she had robbed, and the proceeds were distributed among her victims according to the court's judgment. The Willowbrook Estates development itself became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked HOA power. Property values plummeted as the scandal made national news, and many residents moved away rather than live in a community associated with Karen's crimes. The HOA eventually dissolved, unable to maintain operations in the face of legal liability and community shame. My ranch, once threatened by Karen's fraudulent schemes, was finally at peace. I installed permanent security measures and upgraded my fencing, but these precautions served more as symbols than necessities. The story of my fight against Karen had made national news, creating a deterrent effect that would protect not just my property, but the property of other rural landowners who might face similar threats in the future. The broader impact of Karen's downfall extended far beyond our small county. Her case became a subject of study in law schools and legal seminars, illustrating how organized property fraud operates and how communities can fight back against corruption. Legislative reforms were passed to prevent the kind of document fraud that Karen had perpetrated, and county offices across the state implemented new review procedures for property disputes. Karen Mitchell, the woman who thought she could steal a ranch with fake paperwork and entitled attitude, became an example of how justice eventually prevails over corruption. Her story serves as a reminder that ordinary people have the power to defeat even the most arrogant bullies when they refuse to be intimidated and fight back with truth, determination, and the support of their community. The HOA Karen who tried to steal my ranch learned the hardest lesson of all, that actions have consequences, and justice may be slow, but it is absolutely inevitable.